I want to thank our sponsor, Poseidon's Watch Company, who create stunning military aviation timepieces that are all assembled in the USA and are veteran backed and approved. My personal favourite is the DD45, which is a stunning homage to the original World War II Dirty Dozen watches, but done differently. They have created 3 different dial faces to recreate the stages the original watches would have went through, which are Factory Fresh, which is my personal watch, Tropical and Patina, and you can also get a choice of 4 different straps to create your perfect DD45. The build quality is second to none with a 38mm diameter case, a double domed sapphire crystal, a Swiss-made automatic movement, screw-down crown, 100-meter water resistance, and super luminova hands and indexes. Head over to their website at poseidus.com to check out this amazing watch and their other great military timepieces and get 10% off as a new customer by signing up via their website. Thank you and enjoy. Corky, when did you become interested in aviation?
Well, Mike, I was kind of born to it. My dad was a naval aviator. He joined the Navy in 1950, got his wings in 1956. So I grew up around it. I was born in 1965 when he was flying Sky Raiders and A4s and A7s over Vietnam off the USS Midway. So I was just born to it, really. I was born in Naval Air Station Lemoore, California, right in the middle of Central California. And I grew up in San Diego, and my dad was stationed in different places. He would fly home on the weekends in a T-28 turbo, T-28, I can't remember what that's called, but we'd go pick him up at the Naval Air Station North Island. So I was a kid growing up around naval aviation my entire time, so it was not a hard leap for me to make.
Yeah, so you're cursed with joining the Navy, but so yeah, when did you actually join the Navy, and can you talk us through some of the initial aircraft you started training on?
Sure. I went to San Diego State on an ROTC commission and got my degree in 1988. Got my wings in 1990. In between that, we went to Pensacola for aviation indoctrination, which is like the textbook and schoolwork thing and the physical stuff, and then to Whiting Field to fly the T-34 Turbo Mentor, which is a gas turbine powered twin engine little scooter, if you will. And from there, you select jets, and I happened to select jets, which I asked for. And you get sent to intermediate at the time, which was the T2 Buckeye, interesting old 50s style airplane, kind of a chubby-looking airplane with a really big cockpit, like a bathtub almost. And you do well in that, and you get to advanced, which is the TA-4J Skyhawk, which again is kind of a rocket ship. You're getting progressively faster, progressively more maneuverable as you get through your training. And then once that wrapped up in 1990, you put in your dream sheet, which is what you want to go fly. And I was in the jet pipeline, so my dad was an A7 aviator, and I wanted to fly A7s as well because they were still around in that time. So I had A7s first, F-14s next, and I got F-14s and couldn't have been happier.
Yeah, nice. But so, like, just before we got onto the Tomcat, yeah, what was a Skyhawk like to fly? Because it's a very nimble little jet, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an amazing airplane for its simplicity. Single engine, 2-seat in the T model. It's got these slats that pop out with gravity. Fairly simple jet, can go a long way on a gas, but it's really has a significantly advanced roll rate, which makes it difficult to fight. And as you see from the movies Top Gun, they have those A4 Skyhawks fighting the F-14. They're hard to fight because they're so nimble, maneuverable, small, not real strong in the energy addition and the vertical stuff, but it's a great airplane in its own right. It's got a 720 degree per second roll rate, so it'll do 2 360s in a second. Just a great airplane to fly. And we got so good at getting in that thing and launching as students, we'd just be racing out to our jets, hop in and start them up like a go-kart and go flying. It was really, really fun jet to fly.
Awesome stuff. So let's get on to the mighty Tomcat. So what were your first thoughts on the aircraft?
Big. It's called the flying tennis court for a reason. It's called the Aluminium Overcast for a reason. It's just an enormous jet. When you get to, I went to Miramar in 1990 in April, I think it was, and you start your ground school class for the F-14. You get to go look at it. You get to do things, and then you get to fly it for the first time after you do about 10 or 12 simulators. And it's just this massive airplane because the A4 is like, 28 feet long and or 30 feet long and 28 feet wide. And the Tomcat's 68 feet long and 72 feet wide. Just enormous airplane. And you're sitting all the way in front of this thing, and behind you, you look in your rearview mirrors for the first time. And there's just a whole lot of jet behind you, and you can't believe I'm taking this thing flying. There's no team model, so when you're flying it for the first time, you're flying it, and the guy in back is typically a pilot for your first two, and that same pilot is the guy that qualified you on your simulator to say yes, he's safe to fly it. The Navy's point is, okay, prove it, go with him. Most pilots don't like getting in the back seat, but they have to as an instructor pilot. And so that's your first impression is just the size and scale of it. And then when you're out flying it, just the speed available to you. It's a completely different jet than everything you've flown before that has been kind of analog and, kind of scaled down. This is just big, fast, loud, and really maneuverable.
Absolutely. I'm going to get onto that. But what was the role of the Tomcat when you joined? Was it literally, because I've heard stories where it was all air-to-air, but it had an air-to-ground capability. Was that still inbuilt when you were coming through?
Yes. What had happened was I had started the F-14 RAG, which is the Readiness Air Group, or now it's called the FRS, the Fleet Replacement Squadron, where you train pilots and RIOs to fly. And that was 1990. And then I injured my back and I had to take a year off. So that slid me to the right about a year. And in that time frame, as I started, it was pure fighter. You would be really only the pure fighter role in all your training and all the discussions and things like that. It was about 1992 that the Navy began to dust off the air-to-ground capabilities of the Tomcat because it has all the capabilities. It's got a AUG-15 weapons panel over here on the RIO's left side. You can select bomb types and things. It had has all kinds of, has everything it needs to be a bomber. It was just never something they never really exercised. So that was about 1992, 93. And as I recall, the Navy brought in a lot of former Marine F-4 drivers that used to drop bombs to kind of walk us through it. And then that became part of the syllabus in the F-14 in the RAG. And then as we moved forward, my first cruise in 1993 was pure fighter because that's really what we knew how to do as a community at that time. And then not 3 years later, we're pure bomber, leading the charge, crossing the beach over Iraq because we got the capabilities that had advanced so quickly between 1993 and 96. So the Bombcat, as it became to be known, was very, very lethal towards the end of her service life, and it was a great airplane to do it from because you could carry a lot of bombs a long way, really fast, and so it was a great air-to-ground platform, very stable.
So I think you went A's, didn't you, Corky? Was that normal, or could you choose if you wanted to go B or D?
At the time, the D wasn't really a choice. The D was just coming out in 1980 to 1990, so there was only one or two D squadrons. And in reality, the B was around, but it was really more just the needs of the flight line. You would pop out of the F-124 at Miramar, and there was about 8 or 9, 10 squadrons down the road, and they're looking for a pilot in a RIO and a pilot in a RIO, and off you go. That was about it. So it was destined for me to go to A's because that's just the first place they had for me to go, and it was the VF-24 Renegades.
So can you go into a bit more detail about your ground and flying training on the Tomcat?
The ground training is extensive. There's a lot to learn about a weapon system that big. You've got 3 different types of missiles. You've got the pure fighter mission, which at the time was kind of a fleet air defender mission, going against the former Soviet Union or the Russians and their big bomber fleets. So a whole phase was dedicated to fleet air defense in a jamming environment versus large forces you're coming towards the ship. Your tactics phase was your air phase, air combat maneuvering or ACM phase was critical. But a good portion of the hours you developed in the training squadron were familiarization flights. Then you do formation flights, several of those. Then you get into night formation flying, which is a whole different world. Yeah. Then you get into night rendezvous, which are really interesting, trying to rendezvous with somebody at night. And then you've got your basic instruments and advanced instrument flying, where you learn to fly the airplane without seeing it out around you. So there's a lot of it's not all just air combat maneuvering, air to ground training. It was very diverse, and it took a while. It took about a year to do it because there's just so much to do. And then, of course, at the end, you do your first carrier qualification in a fleet jet, which is another interesting thing entirely. But the training itself was very robust. It was a big squadron with probably 40 instructors and at any given time about 3 student classes going through. So there was a lot of people flying a lot every day in the about year you spent learning to fly the F-14.
And in this training phase, would you be practicing air-to-air refueling, or would that come in your frontline squadron?
That comes in later in your first squadron. You get a chance at it. You get like 1 or 2 hops out of one day, one night just to see it, because they need to make sure you can do that before you hit the fleet, because a lot of times you're doing it pretty quickly when you hit the fleet. And so, yeah, that was an interesting element. Hard to get good at because the F-14, had a pretty big nose, and there was kind of a bow wave that comes off. So as you approach the basket, it's up here to your high and to your right. It moves away from the airplane as you get close. So you have to kind of like stab into it and make sure it doesn't get too far away from you. So that took a little concentration to make that work for the first time. And when you are practicing it, even as an instructor pilot, it was fun to watch the students do it for the first time because, you're probably not going to hurt yourself too bad, but it was pretty funny watching the jet kind of jockey around as they didn't know what the hell they were doing. But yeah, I was about the same way, I think.
And I have to ask, what was your first Tomcat takeoff like? Did you have the burners in, and could you feel the power coming from, the aircraft you were training on?
Yeah, I did a story on my Twitter feed or X feed about my first pre-flight, but didn't really get into the first flight. But, my first pre-flight was just an amazing sensation. I can still remember standing on top of the airplane looking at it going, oh my gosh, this thing is enormous. And then when you get in the airplane, the post-start checks are so complicated that it takes the average student like an hour to get out of the chocks. It's so slow. You don't know what you're doing. There's switches everywhere, and there's checklists you're reading through. And eventually you get out of the chocks, and you make it to the hold short where you're about to take off. The hold short's just before the runway itself. And you look down. There's a couple more. There might be an A4 Skyhawk next to you because he's going out for a bogey hop. And you look down and you think, my gosh, that airplane's tiny. I used to fly that one. And then you take a runway for the first time, and you've practiced over and over again in the simulator. But the first time you go to military power, which is max power, that afterburner, and you do your control wipeout, and you say, I guess we're going because we're clear for takeoff, and you come around the corner with the blowers and advance them as you take off the brakes. You're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's completely different flying than you've ever done before. The A had a pretty good kick. The B had a massive kick. The B was a rocket ship, if you will. So, but yeah, I remember the first takeoff out of Miramar is funny because you take off out of Miramar and you're launching over some of the most expensive real estate in the world, namely La Jolla, California, and you're just trying to follow the course rules, and you're trying not to fly over the wrong houses, and you're just trying to go to the right altitude, and you're trying to come out of afterburner at the right time. It's just kind of you're what's called behind the jet. You're hanging on the vertical stabs. The jet's about out in front of you, and you're trying your best to stay up, claw your way forward and mentally get ahead of the jet. But you don't normally make it on your first flight. You're still kind of getting your bell rung the entire time.
So how was training like working with a Rio? Was that quite a skill to get used to as a pilot?
Yeah, 2 crewed airplanes are very, very different. My dad was a single-seater, and, we make a lot of jokes about I'd rather have 200 pounds of gas in the back seat, ha ha ha. But in reality, the F-14 was never designed to be flown by one person. It's way too complex. There's way too much going on with the weapon systems and the Phoenix and the AUG-9 radar systems. So it was a very labor-intensive airplane that had to have 2 people working in it. And you develop kind of what's called, back then was called crew concept, where you would, depending on who you flew with, if you flew with them enough, you could anticipate each other's moves and senses and radio calls because you were flying so good together. But that takes a long time to develop. And as a student flying the airplane, you're just trying to fly the airplane and get the mission done and get the training points accomplished. A lot of times you're just focused so much on the technical. You're not really working with the crew concept yet. And most instructor Rios know that. They're not bothering you. But to the point they can probably fly the airplane better than I could at the time. So they are always a useful piece of information to listen to, because they would tell you you're a little you fast here, you're low, you're high, or something like that. And you generally listen to them because you're just a new guy. But once you got into the fleet squadron and the crew concept took over, it was a thing of beauty to work with some of the finest Rios out there that were just like wizards with the airplane, wizards with troubleshooting. They could get the thing to work right every time, and they were just another extension of your brain working together to fly the airplane and play it as a weapon system.
And you mentioned before, what was your first landing on the boat in the Tomcat like? That must have been an experience and a half, Corky.
I remember carrier qualifications pretty well. By that time, you've gotten pretty good, but not great. It's the first time you ever land on a carrier at night, because you've done, I think, 8 landings in T2 Buckeyes and like 10 landings in A4 Skyhawk. Those are all day landings in Key West. Now here you're going out, and I'm not sure what boat it was. It might have been the Enterprise. But you're going out for your first carrier qualification. Day is pretty interesting. When you come into the overhead for the first time in a new airplane, you're doing the carrier brake, where you come over the ship and you turn left and smooth turn to downwind, put the wings out, gear down, flaps down, all that kind of stuff. And you're trying to get to a beam position, start your turn on time, and start the descent rate, all those technical things. But while that's all going on, your brain is just shrinking to the size of a pea, because the tension's getting more and more. So really all you have left is your training, what you've been rehearsing over and over and over and over again on land. You just kind of fall back into that. So there's not a whole lot of great technique. The real is just making sure you don't hit the back of the ship, and you cross the ramp during the day, and you just, trap, okay, I did it. And then it's just refining that a little bit. But your first CQ effort, you're going to do, I think it was 10 day and 4 nights, something like that. And you're going to do the day pretty well. You might get all 10 done in one day, maybe not, but then the night page comes, and that really separates, naval aviators from everybody else. Landing on the ship does, of course, but doing it at night is completely different. It's a very long straightaway. You've been practicing again. And I was pretty good at instrument flying. That was always a good skill set of mine. So I could get myself to a position at the back of the ship when they say 3/4 mile, call the ball. You're flying these little needles down that are showing you, you're low, you're high, you're left, you're right, that kind of thing. And you line those crosshairs up, and you're right in the middle where you're supposed to be, and you're flying, your appropriate descent rate. And then you simply transition from looking at the needles, then you look out at the boat, then you look back at the needles and back at the boat, and then you're flying the ball, which I'm sure you've heard about on the left side, which is the glide slope indicator, and you're trying to stay on center line. So if you're doing everything right, the corrections are really small. You're just kind of like doing this, kind of nudging things back and forth. If you're out to lunch, you're doing this, so you're going crazy, and they also can see it. But I remember my first night landings were fairly intense pucker factor, just because I'd done this in training, I've seen it a million times, but this is different now, because if I don't do it right, things are going to go really badly. But yeah, that was my first night.
Amazing, yeah. Must have been terrifying because of some of the stories I've heard in the past. But
terrifying. Well, they do tell you they did those studies in Vietnam when they wired up all the pilots coming back from over North Vietnam, and the time their heart rate went the highest is when they were landing the ship. So
yeah,
it's more scary than combat in certain senses.
So how long did your training last before you got posted to your first squadron, and what was that squadron?
So VF-24 Renegades. I joined the Renegades in, it was interesting. I CQ'd in December of 92, and the Renegades were going on cruise in February of 93. And so I had a few tactics hops to get with the RAG, because I didn't quite finish. Back then, you try and launch a 4VX in a Tomcat squadron, getting 4 jets up at once is pretty tough. So I think there were 2 4V hops, and those 4Vs take a couple of weeks, because you keep trying and the jets keep breaking, and you keep trying. So during the day I was flying 4Vs with VF-124, and then I'd already checked into VF-24, so I'm flying CQ at night with them because we're going on cruise soon, and I need to get carrier qual back up because I'm the new guy. I'm brand new. And that was January of '93. Then we CQ'd and we took off on cruise. But interesting, funny story. We were CQing with VF-24 middle of January at Miramar, and I go up in a jet and get my 10 or 12 passes. We come back and we hot switch, which means in this case the Rio stayed in, Bosco stays in, and Pester is going to get in behind me. I hop out, he gets in. It just saves time on the jet, right? Mm-hmm. And he does. He starts doing his FCLPs or field carrier landing practice, where he's at the field just practicing. And he has he's turning final, and he has a firelight. I think it's his left firelight comes on. He's like, oh crap. And he's starting to feel the airplane slow down. So he goes to full power, goes to full blower. The airplane starts to speed up a little bit. So he pulls the left fire handle, which puts the fire out, turns the left throttle off, and the airplane just starts to mush. And just before it stalls, the Rio shells him out, boink, boink, and it lands in straight down in a landfill just off of Miramar's left off the runway. Straight in a landfill, boink. And they get one swing, they're fine. Turns out they had to down the entire fleet because at the factory, there were several jets that had the firelights crossed. So his left engine was working fine. It was the right engine that was on fire. So he pulls the wheel shut off, turns the left motor off, and he's doomed from that point. And that's my welcome to the fleet. Because I walk in, I'm like, where's everyone running? 2 good shoots. What the hell? And that was my, welcome to the fleet story. I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what was your first cruise like? Were you prepared for it?
I was a little older because I taken that year off, so I was a little bit older. My dad he lived forever, so I kind of knew what to expect. In reality, it was all very new to me, of course, but I was not unfamiliar with the lifestyle. But what was the most energizing was just the people you're working with, the aviators and the sailors. Everyone's just banding together to do a great job. Just the amount of work you go through, and the camaraderie, and the hard work of the sailors keeping the jets up, and the aircrew. And they say you'll never like a squadron better than your first one. It turns out to be true, because that's your first go around when you're living and working with the best of the best of anybody, and you're learning from the best, and you're flying with the best, and you're doing some cool missions, and you're launching off the boat. Your first time you're blue water, which means there's no place to go. Yeah. You're flying over the ship, you look out, and you go, yeah, there's literally no place to go. If I can't land here, I guess I got to get wet, Yeah. And that's a real eye-opener. Carrier ops, doing them all the time is an eye-opener. My first launch at night was interesting. Back in these days, it was, this is 1993, so if you're the new guy, they're going to fly it every day and every night because they want you to get out there and practice and get better and better and better and better. So my first night launch on a cruise is we just left San Diego, and the weather is just awful. The rain's coming down sideways. There's 40 miles an hour in the wind. The deck is pitching, and there's like a 10-plane launch or something. And I'm on it because, hey, I'm the new guy. Go figure it out, right? And we get upstairs on the roof, and we're manning up the jet, and it's just, you're soaking wet when you finish your pre-flight. My backseater Butch is the maintenance officer, and he has a vested interest in my success here because obviously, if I hit the back of the ship, he's not going to make it. So he's talking to me. I'm going, dude, this is awesome. This is so cool. I'm like, are we going to go? He's like, yeah, man, we're going. This is going to be great. I'm like, okay. Get in the jet, close the canopy, and it gets quiet again. Okay, power, get the thing started, get started up. And I'm like, but you sure we're going? Oh man, it's going to be awesome. This is going to be the coolest thing ever. So sure enough, the yellow shirt comes over and seals break us down and pull chocks, and we start taxiing forward. I'm like, but are we really going to go? It's really kind of nasty out there. Oh, this is going to be awesome. This will be the best thing ever. So we line up on the cat, and sure enough, they go wings out. Okay, flaps down. Okay, military power. Okay, zone 5, and okay, here we go. turn the landing lights on, and boom, off we go, right in the clouds.
Wow.
And we start climbing out and climbing, and they go to like 26,000 feet. And Butch calls the ship was, yeah, we're in the clag till 26K. We can work on top, but it's not that nice up here either. So the ship goes, Roger that. Your signal is vectors to final. We're canceling the launch. And this is when I learned about what was called the sacrificial Tomcat, because they figured, well, Tomcat's got 20,000 pounds of gas. Launch them out. It's too crude. See if the weather's bad. If it's bad, we'll cancel everybody else. Then bring the Tomcat back. That was me my first trip. So now I'm airborne coming back in really bad weather, really kind of a pitch and deck. And everyone knows I'm the only guy airborne. So there's this TV on the ship that shows every landing. Every person's glued to watching you try to come back aboard the ship first try, come down the chute, and sure enough, you can't see anything. I start that transition scan, 3-quarter mile, call the boss, like, oh, I can't see the ship. Oh boy, okay, please be there next time. Sure enough, there it is. Okay, I got it. Deck's moving, but I don't notice, and boom, we trapped. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was crazy. So that was my welcome to the fleet moment of, time to grow up pretty fast here, kid, because it's going to be a rough ride if you can't handle that kind of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to ask here, Corky, did so on your first cruise, did other Tomcat squadrons mix together, or were you quite separate?
We were at the time we were a 2 Tomcat squadron Airwing 9, CAG 9, and our sister squadron was the VF-211 Checkmates. They were, your sister squadron or your weak sister squadron, as you call them, because you want to make fun of them all the time. There's always that rivalry thing we would do, Their tactical call sign was Nickels, so we called them Knuckles, and they called us VF-24ons, just ribbing each other back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
We generally flew together in larger forces. If we could do a 4-plane, we'd probably mix the squadrons, but otherwise you're generally a 2-plane. The missions there were primarily Operation Southern Watch, so it was basically just a section of Tomcats going up. And then eventually we started doing a mixed section with the Hornets. We would go up with the Tomcat had that real long range radar, right? And the Hornets had all their advantages of being newer systems, so they would do a mixed section to keep an eye on anybody flying over Iraq.
So what other squadrons did you fly with? And I think you had the opportunity to fly the B model as well.
I did. After I finished VF-24, I wanted to go to Point Mugu, California to fly the VX-9, but my XO said, no, you're going to go to VF-101 as a RAG instructor. So I came out to Virginia Beach in 1996 as a RAG instructor and flew the F-14A for the most part. Got about 100 hours in the B. Completely different airplane to fly. You fought it completely differently, where if you're doing ACM in an F-14A, for the most part, you toss the throttles in the upper left corner of full blower, and then you start flying the jet because you're not going to come out of blower, right?
Yeah.
In the B, if you point your nose down in blower, you're going to accelerate so quick you're not going to know what's hit you. And I found that out a couple of times trying to do ACM in a B is you got to keep those throttles out of blower pointing down, because you go from 320 really good turn rate to 600 knots. All of a sudden you're almost supersonic going downhill. You're like, okay, I got to get out of this afterburner every time I point the nose down, which took some doing to learn because I've had almost 1,000 hours at that point flying A. So yeah, I got the B in flying a VF-101, and then I got one D flight. I was going to try to qualify for the D, and we were headed out to Whidbey Island for an air show, I think, and I was the air show spare flying a B, and so at one of our stops, we switched airplanes. I flew the D for one flight, much like the B in terms of power. It was just all the symbology was completely new. Didn't really know how to read all the inside because it was a completely different airplane.
So was the A and B the same internally and software-wise? It was just the engines that were changed? Pretty
much. Then the B got an upgrade. The Bug, we called it B upgrade, added a much more capable heads-up display and some more digital architecture.
Right, yeah. And you also managed to fly in Japan with 154. What was that like? That must have been an amazing experience.
Oh, yeah. Japan was pretty crazy. I had tried to catch. When you're a RAG instructor, you get a chance to instruct incoming prospective XOs and COs of squadrons that are going to be going back to the fleet after a shore tour. So my goal was to attract the attention of somebody going to a Mediterranean cruise, because all my friends, I did Westpacks to death. All my friends that done med cruises say, "Oh, dude, it's awesome. You're pulling every week, and you're going to Italy and France." And I'm going, "Oh, I'd love to do a med cruise." We call them club med cruises because you didn't do much, right? Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but I caught the eye of the CEO bound for Japan. And so I got the nod to go be a department head in Japan in 154, which is very interesting. Conventional boat, the Kitty Hawk, great ship, not a huge deck, but a great ship. They managed to work really well. The air wing was great. The squadron was tighter than tight. The Black Knights were known for being one of the tightest squadrons in the air wing. When we all went to the club, all the wives came and we closed the place down, and even when the boys are out on cruise, the wives are closing the club down once in a while, so very, very tight-knit squadron, kind of that shared adversity. Living in Japan isn't especially easy, especially if you're out in town for the first year. So that was some shared adversity that made the squadron even tighter. High caliber of people to go out there, because you got to be some of the best to really handle the challenging conditions. I remember we were doing our first CQ out there, and there are technically limits to ship movement and roll and pitch and heave and things. You technically shouldn't be doing after certain limitations, but in Japan, it's just get it done. It's like, okay, all right. So you're out there some really pitching decks, and it was not so hard for me as an older guy, but the younger guys, they just came from the RAG like I did back in VF-24, and they're thrust in that environment. So as we said, you grew up really fast. You had to, because it was such an adverse environment. And then there was supposed to be kind of a battle rhythm to the deployments. You did 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the fall. You just kind of did that readiness thing. You worked with the Korean contingency and things like that, and exercises and all that kind of stuff. But both times we went out to sea in 98 and 9, we got called to the Persian Gulf because they had a gap and the Persian Gulf was hot. So we spent, a 6-month cruise that we weren't supposed to spend in the Persian Gulf, and it just kept getting longer and longer. So that forces the families back home to grow up really fast too, because we're just not there. Of the 2 years I spent in Japan, it's probably, I was gone for at least a year and 2 months.
Wow. Yeah, so it must have been, was it difficult to keep in contact as well? Did you have phones on the ship you could use freely to call back home?
Yeah, this is 98, 9. So email's a thing, kind of getting to be a thing, but it wasn't
Right.
hot. There was one computer in the red room you could sit down on, or two, I think. So it was still kind of letter mail and care packages and things like that. And letter mail is funny. Even on my first cruise, you get the letter from your wife, and it's like, "Oh, the water heater's leaking 4 weeks ago." Hope that works out. So that makes Navy wives pretty rugged stock, if you will. They got to put up with a lot of that kind of crap. But so there was phones available, and you could keep contact. What was cool though was the wives could meet you someplace, because it wasn't that far. We had the wives up in Singapore for a week, had a good time there, and then one time they had them come to Dubai. So you could make that cruise a little bit better with that kind of proximity.
So before we move on, what was the social side like? Would you mix with everyone on the boat, or would you stick to your squadron? Would it just be aircrew if you went out, let's say Japan, for instance?
Yeah, our squadron, both the Black Knights and VF-24, were kind of known to be Liberty Hounds, where we were first off the boat and last to come back. And we'd stay in a big pack, as a group. I remember we were in Thailand in VF-24, and we were walking past the large pool at this really nice hotel, and the admiral staff was having some kind of function, like a farewell or something like that, and their chief of staff was on the microphone talking about the upcoming event, yada yada yada, and they go walking by, and the admiral's sitting there, Admiral BN, And the chief of staff goes, "Oh, there goes 24. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya." And we all kind of stop. We're like, "What did he say? Did you say that? Really?" So we go walking over to him. We take the mic from him and we pick him up. We throw him in the pool. And the admiral's laughing his ass off all the time, going, "What? You picked on VF-24. You don't want to do that, you know?"
Yeah.
So similar for the Black Knights, though, very, very tight-knit squadron. We travel in groups and packs and stay together and play together and fly together and fight together. One of the better units. Again, that shared adversity makes a unit very, very tight. That's why combat units stick together forever, because they've been through something that's very challenging. I'm not equating life in Japan to combat, trust me, but just that sense of shared adversity can have a unique bond with people. And we mixed with the maintainers out in town for a little bit. That was obviously something you don't want to do a lot of. There's that distance you're supposed to maintain. So you would have a couple of beers with the troops once in a while and buy them a couple of beers, but you wouldn't make it a habit, if you will.